The lights were merciless studio white and clinical, like a courtroom stripped of its soul. Everything on set gleamed, even the tension. Producers whispered in corners like co-conspirators. Sound engineers fidgeted with frequencies. The countdown. Clock above the camera blinked red. Inching toward 0, Pam Bondi stood in front of the mirror in her dressing room, lips pursed into a calculated calm. Her fingers tapped against the edge of a sealed manila file. It looked almost too thick to be casual. Her makeup artist hovered, mascara wand paused in mid-air. Bondi waved her off. "This will speak louder than eyeliner," she murmured, eyes never leaving the file. Down the hallway, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in a small prep room. No papers, no screen. Just her thoughts, and the soft vibration of her phone on the table. A text from her chief of staff. "Bondi has something. Looks federal, be ready." She didn't flinch. She adjusted the lapel mic clip to her collarbone and stood up slowly. Her eyes were quiet, but her spine was straight steel. Jasmine Crockett had walked into rooms like this before, rooms dressed as conversations but armed like trials. She understood what it meant to be a black woman in a white space framed for conflict. She knew how to smile without blinking, how to carry law and lived experience in the same breath. Outside, the moderator's voice echoed across the set. Coming up next, 2 powerful legal voices on the state of justice in America. The countdown hit 0 o'clock. The floor director pointed, cameras panned in. The signal went live. Crockett and Bondi sat across from one another beneath a halo of artificial light, the table between them slick and cold. The host offered the usual opening. "Tonight, we welcome former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi and current U.S. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to discuss the future of civil rights. ENFORCEMENT in America." Bondi smiled, tight and practiced. Crockett's nod was slight, distant, then Bondi leaned forward. "Before we begin, I'd like to clarify something." She reached into her bag and slid the file onto the table. "This," she said, tapping. "The folder was given to me by someone who believes Americans deserve transparency." She opened it slowly. Documents inside, some redacted, some not fanned out. She pulled one page free. It appears Congresswoman Crockett's legal advocacy in the 2019 Wilkins case may have been compromised by undisclosed donations from a group later listed as a federal defendant. A beat of silence fell like a gavel. The host blinked. "Excuse me?" Bondi nodded. "I have the paperwork right here." It raises serious questions about whether the Congresswoman acted with impartial legal ethics during a case that, may I remind you, was supposed to protect voting rights. The camera cut to Jasmine. Her expression didn't change. Not an inch, but something shifted. Not on her face in the room. A chill threaded through the audience. Viewers at home were already screen recording, texting, tagging. The host fumbled. "For transition. Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" Jasmine's voice was calm. "Not yet." Bondi's brow rose in quiet triumph. Jasmine folded her hands on the table and looked straight into the lens. She had just made her decision. She wouldn't answer now. She would end this on her terms. And when she did, the truth wouldn't just silence the room. It would tear the roof off. The lights faded to commercial. But the silence between them lingered, dense, charged, unbearable to those who didn't know how to breathe in war zones. Jasmine stayed still, posture unshaken. The same way she had stood in courtrooms where the verdict had already been written in skin tone. Across from her, Bondi smiled like someone who thought she'd already won. The producers swarmed like flies. As soon as the cameras cut, makeup artists dabbed at sweat that hadn't earned its place. The host leaned in toward Jasmine with a whisper that tried to sound neutral. "Do you want to preview your response? Segment 2 starts in 90. Jasmine didn't answer. She turned instead to her aide waiting off stage. Her voice was low, but her words landed like lead. "Text Michaela, get me the full Wilkins case file. Not the version we gave the press, the full one. Pull the donation logs and the DOJ time-stamped archive." The aide nodded and disappeared, phone already ringing. Jasmine turned back to the studio lights. Pam had the air of someone who mistook theatrics for strategy. She leafed through the file again, casually letting another damning page fall to the table. Face up. A redacted email suggesting coordination between Crockett's civil rights nonprofit and a donor group that was later federally investigated. It was a neat trick, slippery, almost brilliant. Too clean to be real. Too timely to be coincidence. 30 seconds. Someone called from the floor. Jasmine breathed once deep, silent. The kind that summons memory. She remembered sitting in the back row of a Texas county courtroom at 25, watching a defense attorney spin a timeline like it was gospel, knowing the facts would never be heard past the echo of a white man's confidence. She'd sworn that day to never let silence be read as surrender again, but tonight was different. This wasn't a courtroom. This was television. And sometimes letting your opponent monologue was the most devastating move of all. The red light blinked on. Segment 2. Bondi leaned in again, pressing her advantage. I just want to ask why these donations, Congresswoman, were never disclosed during your interviews about the Wilkins case? Why did your official summary omit the funding? History of your own legal fund? Jasmine looked at her. No blink, no twitch. Then she turned, not to Bondi, but to the camera. The truth, she said, her voice even, is too big for a soundbite. So I'll give you all of it soon. But first, I want America to see the difference between a fact and a performance. She smiled, then added, and between a file and the full record. Bondi opened her mouth, but the host cut in. We'll be right back after this break. And Jasmine, still smiling, looked away. Not at Bondi, not at the host. At the silent fire building behind her eyes. She wasn't playing defense. She was pulling the pin, asterisk. The show ended with applause. But it wasn't the kind that celebrated resolution. It was the applause of confusion, of spectacle. Bondi exited the set with the confidence of someone who thought she had delivered a fatal blow. Her heels clicked like punctuation across the polished floor. Her team buzzed behind her, already drafting press releases, already drafting tweets. Jasmine didn't leave. Not yet. She stayed seated in the now empty studio, fingers gently tracing the condensation on a glass of untouched water. The lights had dimmed, but her mind hadn't. Her phone lit up again. Michaela, file confirmed. DOJ archive doesn't match what Bondi showed. She's altered something, deliberately. There it was, the smoke. And wherever there's smoke, there's always a burn trail. Jasmine stood, finally, walking slowly back to her prep room. Her aide waited outside the door, eyes wide. We pulled everything, the donation in question. It was logged 9 months after the case closed. And it came from a 501c3. That wasn't listed in the plaintiff's disclosure because they weren't involved. She moved the date, Jasmine murmured, looks like it, and redacted the rest to make it look like something it wasn't. Jasmine exhaled long and quiet. So she weaponized a donor list to fabricate motive. She forged implication. Not the documents, technically, just the story. Jasmine leaned against the doorframe, her tone sharpening. And she did it knowing the media wouldn't check the second page, that the public wouldn't care about context. She gambled on the attention span. Her aide nodded. What do we do? Jasmine turned slowly toward her reflection in the mirror across the room. Her eyes weren't tired, they were focused. She gave me a file. Her voice dropped like the prelude to a ruling. I'm going to give her the system. There was a silence, then she turned back. Reach out to Eli. He still has access to the original internal memos from Wilkins. I want everything, timestamps, correspondences, everything that can't be edited. On it? Jasmine looked down at her phone again. Another message had arrived. DOJ contact. The file she used wasn't cleared. Could be a breach. Jasmine didn't reply. She locked the phone and slipped it into her jacket. She had one rule in war. Don't shoot unless you've got the range. And the receipts, tonight. Bondi had thrown the first match, but Jasmine was the one standing next to the fuel line, and now she was lighting her own. Asterisk, the news cycle spun like a fever dream. By midnight, clips of Pam Bondi sliding the file across. The table had flooded every major platform. Twitter lit up with dueling hashtags. Hashtag Crockett exposed and hashtag Bondi lied. Right-wing influencers called it a political checkmate. Conservative media looped the same 3-second clip of Jasmine's. Pause like it was an admission of guilt. Cable networks invited panelists to dissect the silence. She didn't deny it. Her legal record is under review. Pam Bondi is asking the hard questions no one else will. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stayed silent for now. Silence, when you've earned it, becomes pressure. Inside her office, the mood was surgical. Jasmine's staff surrounded a glowing screen. Donation timelines, legal filings, IRS documents laid out like surgical tools before an operation. Michaela clicked through them with methodical precision. She played the date, she said again. This group, Liberty Voice Pack, didn't donate until the following fiscal year. Bondi lifted the name, redacted the context, and implied it was quid pro quo during litigation. She didn't just lie, one aide muttered. She engineered doubt. It's smarter than a lie. It's disinformation wrapped in just enough truth to slip past fact-checkers on a deadline. Jasmine stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the screen without blinking. She didn't just come after me, she said softly. She came after the idea that a black woman can fight for justice and not be owned by someone. The room quieted. Her policy advisor stepped forward. You want to respond? Yes, Jasmine turned toward him. But not here. Not in a tweet? I'm not explaining my integrity in 280 characters while she's spinning headlines. So what? Then? She thinks she buried me with that file? Jasmine said, a wry edge creeping into her voice. I'm going to exhume every institution she's ever weaponized. I want a federal review on the leak. I want the Senate Ethics Committee briefed. And I want a platform big enough to end her myth live. Michaela's eyes lit up. You want to go back on air? Jasmine looked straight at her. No, I want her back on air with me. One table, no host, no buffer. Just truth. The aides exchanged looks. That could backfire. Only if I miss, Jasmine said. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe like she was afraid. She breathed like someone who had been holding it in since law school. Get her on camera again, she said. But next time she doesn't walk out smiling. Outside, the city buzzed in ignorance. But inside that office, war had been declared, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't coming to clear her name. She was coming to make sure no one ever used theirs the way Bondi just had, * 3 floors beneath the Capitol. In a quiet room shielded from cameras and ceremony, Jasmine Crockett sat across from a federal liaison from the Department of Justice. The whistleblower had sent more than a tip. They'd sent receipts, metadata, email threads, internal DOJ memos. That didn't match what Bondi presented on air. Jasmine's legal team now held the smoking gun. Timestamped documents proving Bondi's evidence had been lifted from sealed files, then altered just enough to frame a story that never existed. Across from her, the liaison looked shaken. She was young, maybe mid-30s, likely new to dealing with congressional power plays. These memos were not authorized for public release, she said, her voice a quiet confession. They were part of an ongoing archive review. Someone must have bypassed the flag system. Jasmine leaned forward, voice low, precise. So Bondi got access to privileged DOJ files. She redacted and reframed them. Then she weaponized them live on air to frame a sitting congresswoman with falsified motive. The liaison nodded slowly. We believe the files were accessed through a retired DOJ contractor who now works with a lobbying group out of Tallahassee. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment. Tallahassee. The same network that had tried to gut the Wilkins case before it even reached a judge. Do you want us to open a formal breach investigation? The liaison asked. Jasmine's voice didn't waver. I want more than that. She stood, walking to the window overlooking Constitution Avenue. Rain touched the glass like whispers. I want to know what other cases that lobbying group touched. What other names they bent into fiction. This isn't about me anymore. This is about a machine that knows how to lie in legal language. The liaison nodded, scribbling notes. We'll escalate. And I'll personally flag Bondi's segment as evidentiary misconduct. Good. Jasmine turned, because she didn't just lie. She mutilated the record. And you don't get to do? that without consequences, not to people who still believe the law can be a place of truth. Back in her congressional office, Jasmine's staff were already moving. Michaela had secured every version of the Wilkins filings from the court's internal server. The legal advisor was drafting an official ethics complaint against Bondi's former office. A subpoena request was in the works for the Florida lobbying group's communications, and at the center of it all, Jasmine stood at the conference table, facing a printout of the now infamous screenshot Bondi sliding the file across the studio table. She thought this was a moment, Jasmine said, circling the image with a red pen. But this? This is evidence. It's going in my opening statement. What opening statement? An aide asked. Jasmine looked up. Her eyes held the kind of fire that doesn't flicker, the one I deliver when I call her out, not in private. Not behind some desk? I'm going to face her again, and this time I'm flipping the script. Asterisk, it was never supposed to reach the Senate floor. At least. That's what Bondi's team had hoped, but by the following week, Jasmine Crockett's counteroffensive had moved faster than Beltway decorum. An informal inquiry had begun first within. A quiet ethics subcommittee, then bleeding into whispered side conversations among senior legislators. The question was no longer whether Bondi had exaggerated, but whether she had committed an ethical breach against a sitting member of Congress on live television. Inside the Russell Senate office building, behind a closed oak door marked Privet. Discussion only, a gathering of legal and political veterans reviewed the raw materials, not a debate, not a spectacle. Just facts, the original Wilkins case timeline, the sealed DOJ memos. The manipulated version Bondi used on air? The discrepancy was so obvious it didn't need interpretation. The lie wasn't hidden. It was dressed in a blazer, delivered with a smile. Senator Whitaker, a moderate with 40 years under his belt, exhaled hard and laid the files down. This isn't just political theater. This is procedural corruption. She used a national broadcast to turn due process into performance art. Another senator, younger and sharper-edged, leaned in, and she used federal data to do it. That's not spin, that's a breach. Across town, Jasmine sat in her office, a tablet in her hands, watching Bondi's latest interview play out on a conservative morning show. Pam was playing victim. Now, look, I was just asking questions. If Congresswoman Crockett has nothing to hide, why hasn't she addressed the donations? Why the silence? The host nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's about transparency, right? Jasmine locked the screen. The bile rose in her throat, not from anger but recognition. She'd seen this maneuver 100 times before. A woman smiling while twisting the truth around her wrist like a charm bracelet. But now Bondi was operating from fear. You could hear it in the volume of her voice, the tremble beneath the smile. She was no longer confident she was cornered. Michaela stepped into the room quietly. Senator Ashby's office just called. They want your testimony in closed session tomorrow. It's happening. Jasmine nodded slowly. And Bondi? She's trying to spin it as a witch hunt. But the ethics board already has the full archive. They know she doctored context. She's not going to walk away clean. Jasmine stood, pacing once before pausing by the window. Her voice was low but cutting. She thinks this is about her reputation. Michaela tilted her head. And, it's not? Jasmine turned. No, it's about the precedent. If they let this stand, then any lobby-backed smear can be passed off as asking questions, and the truth will die behind a screen of fake concern. She took a breath, steady and deep. Tomorrow, I'm not testifying for me. I'm testifying for every voice that was ever buried beneath redactions and fear. Michaela nodded. Then we're ready. Outside, the Capitol dome glowed against the night sky like a sanctuary and a stage. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just preparing to defend herself. She was preparing to define the terms of truth, and this time, the chamber would be forced to listen. Asterisk. The room was cold. Not physically, but in tone, in posture, in presence. Senator Ashby presided from the center, flanked by members of the bipartisan ethics committee. No cameras, no press. Just high-back chairs, sealed doors, and the sound of political respiration shallow. Calculated, waiting, Jasmine Crockett entered in silence, flanked only by Michaela and her legal counsel. She wore no lapel pin, no theatrical color, no symbolic scarf. Just black, a statement of focus, not mourning. A declaration that she had not come to dance but to dismantle. Ashby leaned forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for appearing." Voluntarily, Jasmine sat. I wouldn't miss it. Across from her sat Pam Bondi wearing ivory, unbothered, but her eyes gave it away. They flickered too often, darted too quickly between members. She didn't look like a woman about to testify. She looked like a defendant preparing her final smile. The first hour was procedural. They reviewed the timeline of Bondi's broadcast. They dissected the Wilkins case. Then, the hard pivot, the edited segment. Jasmine's digital team had provided both versions unedited and aired. The moment the doctored quote was played side by side with the original, the temperature in the room changed. Senator Vega frowned. "Ms. Bondi, can you explain why this section was removed?" Pam leaned forward, her voice measured. "We had to trim for time. I didn't feel the removed content was relevant to the broader point." Ashby cut in unusually sharp. "You removed exculpatory material, altered the sequence of events, and presented it to millions as if it were fact. That's not editing, that's fabrication." Pam opened her mouth, but Jasmine's voice beat her to it. "Let me speak to that." All eyes turned. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply laid her hands flat on the table and began. "The problem isn't that she lied. The problem is that she expected no one would care." Silence. She believed that the aesthetic of credibility, blonde hair, crisp blazers, a polite tone would shield her from accountability. She thought if she smiled while doing it, no one would call it what it was. A targeted character assassination wrapped in journalism. Ashby's brow furrowed. "Congresswoman," but Jasmine wasn't finished. "She didn't just come for me. She came for the idea that truth is still sacred in public discourse. She took a legitimate tragedy, the Wilkins case, and bent it to fit her narrative. She used a black child's death as a bullet point in her TV segment." Pam blinked, lips parting as if to object, but no sound came. Jasmine's voice, still steady, cut deeper. "And the reason this matters is because if she walks away without consequence, this becomes the new template. Fabricate now, apologize later if ever, and in that model, facts don't matter. Only framing does." The committee sat in stunned quiet. Even the stenographer slowed. Ashby cleared his throat. "We'll recess for deliberation." The gavel struck. Jasmine stood, her breath slow. Her eyes locked on Bondi's for a long second, and for the first time all morning, Pam looked away. She didn't blink. She looked away. Outside the chamber, staffers stirred as the door opened. Reporters circled like sharks, but no one spoke, not yet. The official verdict would come later, but Jasmine didn't need it, because the truth had just been heard in full, in context, and without apology, and the room would never forget it. Hours. Passed. Not in movement, but in tension, the panel had recessed behind closed doors, but the city pulsed outside, screens refreshed. Hashtags brewed. Whispers turned into tweets, and tweets into speculation. But inside the Capitol, behind layers of stone and protocol, the committee deliberated in silence. Jasmine waited in a private side room, no windows. Just a pitcher of untouched water and 3 chairs. Michaela sat to her right, eyes locked on her phone. Her legal counsel was reviewing notes. Pretending not to be nervous, Jasmine stared at the wall, not out of fear, out of focus. She had spent months being misquoted, misrepresented, mislabeled. But today, for the first time, the full truth had landed unfiltered, uncut, and it had made impact. A knock. A clerk entered. "They're ready." The hallway leading back to the chamber was colder now, more final. As if the very walls knew history was shifting inside them. Inside, the seats were filled again. Ashby sat with a stack of papers, unreadable. Senator Vega, arms crossed. The others leaned forward not out of curiosity, but from weight. Political weight, moral weight. Jasmine stood as the verdict was read, Ashby cleared his throat. After reviewing the testimony, footage, and evidence presented, the committee has found that Ms. Pam Bondi did knowingly misrepresent congressional testimony in a manner that constitutes journalistic misconduct, bordering on defamation and endangering the public trust. Gasps rippled through the observers in the back row. Ashby continued. The committee recommends a formal censure of Ms. Bondi and calls for a suspension of her press credentials pending independent review by the FCC and Network Oversight Board. Pam didn't speak. Her face remained still frozen in that practiced, camera-ready neutrality, but her hands told the truth. A single twitch of the right index finger. A flinch. Ashby turned toward Jasmine. As for Congresswoman Crockett, no disciplinary action is warranted. The committee finds her conduct lawful, proportionate, and within the bounds of ethical response to public defamation. It was over, but Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't exhale. Not yet, because the fight had never just been about herself. She turned slowly and looked at Bondi. This could have been a conversation, Jasmine said, voice low but firm. But you made it a campaign. Pam blinked. For the first time, her eyes looked small. Not humbled, cornered. Jasmine walked past her, past the gavel, past the walls that had once felt so indifferent. Each step wasn't a walk of victory, it was reclamation of truth, of voice, of the right to not be silenced by polished lies. Michaela caught up to her in the corridor. The press is already outside. CNN, BBC, even Al Jazeera is here. They want you to speak. Jasmine kept walking. Not yet. Michaela blinked. Why? Jasmine stopped at the exit. Because today wasn't about headlines. It was about record. And now, it's in the record forever. Then she stepped out into the light. The crowd roared. Not the kind of applause reserved for celebrities or politicians. It was something else. It was the sound of people watching someone speak their truth and be heard. The arc had bent. Not easily. Not quickly, but today in a hearing room built for silence. It had bent toward justice. The news didn't just break, it detonated. By sundown, clips from the hearing flooded every feed. TikTok reels looped Jasmine's "This could have been a conversation, but you made it a campaign." It became a soundbite, a slogan, a shield. Young activists stitched it onto denim jackets. Journalists debated it live on primetime panels. Even conservative anchors, hesitant, uncomfortable, were forced to reckon with the evidence laid bare. Pam Bondi's face was everywhere, but not on her terms. Cable news replayed her stone-silent reaction on loop. Meme pages dubbed it the 1,000-yard glare. On Reddit, a new thread topped the front page. How Jasmine Crockett did what Congress couldn't. But for Jasmine, it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. The interview, hours after the verdict. Jasmine sat across from Nina Stokes on the 9th hour. Her team had begged her to rest. She refused. The studio lights dimmed to a dramatic hush. The mood was serious. Not adversarial, but surgical. Nina leaned in. Congresswoman Crockett. What's going through your mind right now? Jasmine didn't blink. Her voice was quieter than the crowd expected, but firmer. This wasn't about me. This was about the lie that the truth is too complex to defend. It isn't. Nina nodded slowly. And to those who say you went too far, called her out too directly? A pause. Jasmine tilted her head. I didn't attack her. I exposed the pattern. She wrapped a falsehood in polite packaging. My job was to unwrap it in public. The studio held its breath. Then applause. Then a cut to break. Online RECTO on hashtags. Exploded. Hashtag Crockett crushed it. Hashtag media on trial. Hashtag Bondi exposed. Hashtag journalism matters. Influencers stitched Jasmine's moments into video essays. Teachers played the hearing in civics classes. Even celebrities chimed in. Viola Davis tweeted, "This is how you hold the line." Hashtag Jasmine Crockett. But it wasn't just praise. Right-wing commentators accused Jasmine of grandstanding. Few lawmakers floated questions about decorum. Tucker Carlson ran a segment titled "The Rise of Courtroom Celebrities." And yet, none could touch the core truth. The transcript was public. The video was archived. The receipts had spoken. A phone call that changed the GAME 2 days later. Jasmine's phone rang. This is Justice Sonia Sotomayor. May I speak with Congresswoman Crockett? Jasmine froze. Yes, speaking. There was a pause. Then the voice came through clear, calm, powerful. You didn't just defend yourself, you defended the system, and reminded it why it exists. Jasmine sat down, quietly. Tears welled but didn't fall. Some calls don't need to be long, just true. One last SCNE back in the same Capitol corridor, Jasmine stood alone. Same heels. Same echo. But this time, the air felt different. Not heavy. Ready. Michaela approached, holding a manila envelope. FCC launched an independent review into Bondi's previous work. You were just cited in their opening statement. Jasmine smiled. Good. Not for me, for the interns, the teachers, the kids with no microphone. She turned to the stairs. Let's go. We've got a real fight next. As she walked into the dusk, cameras flashed. Yes. But this time the story wasn't a flash-in. The pan. It was a flame carried forward, because truth, once spoken boldly, doesn't just echo. It builds.